If you haven't
All right, we're going to listen to this for a few minutes. I'm going to go find my copy of Dune. I'll be right back.
already subscribed to our channel, please do so now. And give us a thumbs up if you want more videos like this. And make sure you stay tuned to the end to see how to get this awesome Dune-inspired graphic design only at mixtees.com. The truth about Dune is that it was almost never published as a novel, and the man who risked everything to make it happen would ultimately be punished for his effort. But let's get back to that in a moment. First, in 1957, the space age began with the USSR launching the first artificial satellite Sputnik 1, propelling humanity in a race for the stars. That same year, 37-year-old Frank Herbert took a small plane to Florence, Oregon to write an article about sand dunes. In a pitch to his editor, he titled it, "They Stopped the Moving Sands." The U.S. Department of Agriculture had discovered a successful method of stabilizing sand dunes by planting poverty grasses at the highest point of the dune to keep them from encroaching on roads and buildings. It's obvious from the letters Herbert sent his editor that he was fascinated with the effects wind-driven sand dunes had in the Sahara and other places, swallowing cities and towns throughout time. But while Herbert was intoxicated to tell this story, his editor made it very clear he was the only one. While Herbert would eventually lose interest in writing the article, he realized it was putting him on a path of something much bigger.
And then when it happened big, and I was very surprised by how big it came along.
Okay, listen to this. This is at the end of the book in the afterword. Remarkably, no aliens inhabit the Dune universe, even the most exotic of creatures, the mutant guild navigators, are humans. So are the vile genetic wizards, the Tleilaxu, and the Golas, grown in their flesh vats. Among the most unusual humans to spring from Herbert's imagination, the women of the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood have a collective memory, a concept based largely upon the writings and teachings of Carl Gustav Jung, who spoke of a collective unconscious, that supposedly inborn set of contents and modes of behavior possessed by all human beings. These were concepts my father discussed at length with Ralph Slattery's wife, Irene, a psychologist who had studied with Jung in Switzerland in the 1930s. Frank Herbert's life reached a crescendo in the years after 1957 when he focused his unusual experiences, knowledge, and creating his great novel. In the massive piles of books he read to research Dune, he recalled reading somewhere that ecology was the science of understanding consequences. This was not his original concept, but as he learned from Ezra Pound, he made it new and put it in a form that was palatable to millions of people. With a worldview similar to that of an American Indian, Dad saw a Western man inflicting himself on the environment, not living in harmony with it. Despite all the work Dune required, my father said it was his favorite book to write. He used what he called a technique of enormous detail, in which he studied and prepared notes over a 40-year period between 57 and 61, then wrote and rewrote the book between 61 and 65. As Dad expanded and contracted the manuscript depending upon which editor was giving him advice, an error found its way into the final manuscript. The age of Emperor Shaddam Carino IV is slightly inconsistent in the novel, but it is one of the few glitches in the entire Dune series. This is remarkable considering the fact that Frank Herbert wrote the books on typewriters. More than 1 million words without the use of a computer to keep all of the information straight. Late in 1961, in the midst of his monumental effort, Dad fired his literary agent Lurton Blassingame because he didn't feel the agent was supportive enough and because he couldn't bear the thought of sending any more stories into the New York publishing industry, which had been rejecting him for years. A couple of years later, when the new novel was nearly complete, he got back together with Blassingame and went through the ordeal of rejection after rejection, more than 20 of them, until Chilton finally picked up the book and paid an advance of $7,500. If not for a far-sighted editor at Chilton, Sterling Lanier, Dune might never have been published, and world literature would be the poorer for it. When my father and I became close in my adulthood and we began to write together, he spoke to me often of the importance of detail, of dentistry, or dentist, or density of writing. Student psychology understood the subconscious and liked to say that Dune could be read on any of several layers that were nested beneath the adventure story of a messiah on a desert planet. Ecology is the most obvious layer, but alongside that are politics, religion, philosophy, history, human evolution, and even poetry. Dune is a marvelous tapestry of words, sounds, images. Sometimes he wrote passages in poetry first, which he expanded and converted to prose, forming sentences that included elements of the original poems. Dad told me that you could follow any of the novel's layers as you read it, and then start the book all over again, focusing on an entirely different layer. At the end of the book, he intentionally left loose ends and said he did this to send the readers spinning out of the story with bits and pieces of it still clinging to them, so that they would want to go back and read it again. A neat trick, and he pulled it off perfectly. I don't understand that. He wrote, left loose ends and said he did this to send the readers spinning. Okay. As his eldest son, I see familial influences in the story. Earlier, I noted that my mother is memorialized in Dune, and so is Dad. He must have been thinking of himself when he wrote that Duke Leto's qualities as a father have long been overlooked. The words have deep significance to me because at the time he and I were not getting along well at all. I was going through a rebellious teenage phase, reacting to the uncompromising manner in which he ruled the household. At the beginning of Dune, Paul Atreides is 15 years old, around the same age I was at the time the book was first serialized in analog. I do not see myself much in the characterization of Paul, but I do see Dad in Paul's father, the noble Duke Leo Atreides. In one passage, Frank Herbert wrote, "Yet many facts open the way to this Duke. His abiding love for his Bene Gesserit lady, the dreams he held for his son." Late in his life, Dad responded to interview questions about my own writing career by saying the acorn doesn't fall far from the oak tree. He often complimented me to others more than he did to me directly. To most of his friends, he seemed like an extrovert, but in family matters, he was often quite the opposite, preferring to retire to his study. Frequently, his strongest emotions went on the page, so I often feel him speaking to me as I read his stories. Once I asked my father if he thought his magnum opus would endure. He said modestly that he didn't know and that the only valid literary critic was time. Dune was first published in 1965. And Frank Herbert would be pleased to know that interest in his fantastic novel and the series it spawned has never waned. An entire new generation of readers is picking up Dune and enjoying it, just as the parents did before them. Like our own universe, the universe of Dune continues to expand. Frank Herbert wrote 6 novels in the series, and I've written a number of others in collaboration with Kevin J. Anderson, including the dramatic final chapter in the Dune series. Frank Herbert was working on that project when he died in '86, and it would have been the third book in a trilogy that he began with Heretics of Dune and Chapter House Dune. In those novels, he set up a great mystery, and now, decades after his death, the solution is most closely guarded secret in science fiction. By the time we complete those stories, I'm sure as soon as Kamala and Waltz are like put in, there will be a new Dune movie. By the time we complete those stories, there will be a wealth of Dune novels, along with a 1984 movie directed by David Lynch and 2 television miniseries, Frank Herbert's Dune and Frank Herbert's Children of Dune, both produced by Richard Rubinstein. We envision other projects in the future, but all of them must measure up to the lofty standard that my father established with his own novels, or unless we can get paid enough. When all of the good stories have been told, the series will end. But that will not really be a conclusion because we can always go back to Dune itself and do it all over again if we got to make more money. Brian Herbert, Seattle, Washington. So wait, he doesn't have the same name? Brian Herbert? Yeah, Frank Herbert. Okay. All right. Well, I guess he loved his daddy. I love my daddy too. My daddy wrote the most famous fucking book in the world. Dune. It goes on and on and on. Ooh.
But that's exactly what's happening in the cosmos right now.
What was that?
It's exactly what's happening in space, in the universe, right this second.
What, it goes on forever? Like a puta?
Yeah.
Okay, any comments, thoughts, ideas about Dune?
I did like the second one. Did you see the remake?
Yeah, I love it. I love all of them. I like even the cheesy ones, like from the science fiction channel. Like those were, they're always like they put so much work into them. That's why I hate people who criticize it, because it's like, motherfucker, do you know how much money and time went into making this like 60-second clip?
You know, they have to justify their existence.
Who, Hollywood?
Well, the critics, right? They have to criticize, because that's what they do to get paid,
No, that's true. I forgot they call them
to
critics.
justify their existence. Now, wouldn't it be cool if we also find the spice and we extend our lives?
It's all just metaphor. They were like, is that a metaphor for shrooms? I'm like, you idiots. Don't you know fucking cannabis is the spice, you idiots?
You know what's funny is, and you probably know this, but in Exodus, God tells Moses to utilize cannabis in the holies of holies and to put it on the Ark of the Covenant and to rub it on all of the surfaces. But in Exodus, it doesn't say the word cannabis. It uses the word cannabis in Hebrew. That's why most people didn't catch it.
Yeah, I've never really, I should get a book on Hebrew, like more detailed, because if you can communicate in Hebrew, that's a nice language. But I'll tell you, Google Translate, I was translating poetry using Google Translate, and man, oh my God, my shit was blowing up, going viral, because I was like writing about war and shit and like creating poetry. It's getting a lot of views. It's because it was like there was an escalation with Hezbollah. Hezbollah. It's like saying has balls.
I named them Pepe and Jose.
Romoño, ¿qué pasa, amigo? Soy de mexicano, güey.
Wait, what happened to him?
I tried to make him a moderator. Hit the move to audience.
Dude, bring him back up. Let's see. I'm gonna invite him.
That's my coach, I think.
There we go.
Different podcast.
Yeah, he's missing.
Romoño, ¿qué pasa?
Llegaron las putas a tu casa.
He aquí,
Aquí.
el cortero de tíos caros del mundo. Vámonos, caballeros.
Vámonos. Vámonos, Hitman.
Okay, I'm buying everybody a puta tonight. I want to spread love and joy.
I remember I used to work for these ticket brokers. Like, dude, do you want us to get you a hooker? I was like, yeah. And then they're like, all right, we'll get you one. So I was like, all right, fucking great. And then I was like, come on, do it. They're like, nah, I don't think so, man. They're like, I think either they were worried that if my dad found out, they could like, get in big trouble or something. That's probably what they were thinking. Because I guarantee you, like,
Or
I wouldn't be surprised if my dad would shake him down. He'd be like, all right, either I'm going to arrest you guys or, like, you're going to have to pay me. Because my other uncle shook, man, I've heard terrible things, you know? People do crazy, sick, disgusting, abusive things, you know? That's why the Kwisatz Haderach, don't fuck with the Kwisatz Haderach. What year did they start putting air conditioning in hotels?
in 68.
So you mean the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the fucking 60s? It was miserable all summer long?
I think you're right. Probably the 30s.
Because I don't know how people live without air conditioning. Like, imagine 1875, you're like, God damn, it's fucking hot. And they're like, stop complaining. What you want to do about it? Nothing.
They used blocks of ice.
Yeah, that's true. How did they make it, though?
At these big ice factories. So you'd buy your block of ice, and then you'd put it like in the living room, and it would cool the air around it, and somewhat cool the house.
Oh yeah, the ice with the fan.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what they did back in the day. They had the block of ice with the fan.
and then you'd invite your puta over for cocktails,
Yep.
and within 30 minutes, you could smell the ripeness because your puta was sweaty.
Puta! Puta, put your panties back on. You made my apartment smell like your puta.
Dude, we gotta get you a stand-up comedian job, man. And use the name, the professional name, like a comedian. It would be Steve Appel. Man, that's right. I think Healthy Debates has run out of titles. They got this crazy title. It's fucking long. I don't even remember what it said. Oh, I got a good title for your room, Adrian. You should say intellectual debates.
Okay, so I'm gonna read some Spanish news. I'm gonna try to get into Spanish, bro.